Hello, good morning. My name is Peter Wooding and welcome to Automotive EV. Today is the start of our latest battery supply chain series. And well, I'm delighted today to be joined by Dmitry Kulish and Achim Glass from their respective companies, covering episode 1, where we're looking at air freight within the EV sector. And so I will now hand you over to both Achim and Dmitry. And any questions anyone has, please use the chat facility. If you need to ask questions and you want them to be slightly more private, you're also able to contact both Dmitry and Achim directly. And we will deal with as many questions as we can towards the end of this episode. So thank you very much. And it's over to you, Achim.
Thank you, Peter. Welcome to the air freight market update and implications on EV supply chains in times of severe freight capacity shortage. My name is Achim Glass. I've been working for Kühne Nagel for the past 22 years. In my particular automotive expertise lies in lithium-ion battery logistics, in particular reverse logistics for damaged and faulty batteries, but also EV startup supply chains. The top 3 takeaways for you from this session today are, first of all, understand the reason for the capacity shortage which we currently experience in the air freight market, which is resulting in the high volatility and unreliability of inbound EV supply chains. We get an overview on the respective implications for these supply chains. And actually, we will give you an idea how the air freight market will develop and will react to those implications which we are experiencing today. Before we start, although, we would like to have a very little disclaimer. The opinions which Dmitry and I will share, these are opinions, our personal opinions based on experience which we have from the past couple of weeks and months by talking to automotive customers actually literally every day. With regard to the table of contents, we would like to structure the session today into 5 different sections. We will start by having a discussion, what's different between 2021 and 2020? Why are we having this particular situation? This will be followed by the respective implications. What does it really mean for the automotive EV inbound supply chains? We will speak about the reaction from the market, what are the cargo carriers doing, what are the freight forwarders doing, what are also the tier 1 suppliers and car makers doing. And we will close the session by giving you an outlook, how we as experts expect the market to develop over the next 6 to 12 weeks. And then we should have some 10 to 15 minutes left towards the end of this session to go through your questions. As Peter mentioned previously, please submit us your questions in the live chat right away. And Dmitry and Achim, we will be observing the live chat on our screen, and we will then immediately have the possibility to respond to your questions. So let's start the discussion by exploring why we see this big difference in the air freight market today. And for today's discussion, we have Mr. Dmitry Kulish from Volgo Dnieper Group. And I've been knowing Dmitry for various years. He's also a passionate automotive and battery aficionado. And I think there's no one better than having an expert from the air cargo industry to shed some light into the situation. So Dmitry, hello. Maybe you would like to start by introducing yourself.
Thank you very much, Achim. I appreciate your introduction. My name is Dmitry Kulish, and I represent Volga Dnieper Group, and I'm in charge for high-tech and automotive industry development. And actually, for those of you who doesn't know about Volga Dnieper, this is the group of the company. Basically, we have several companies as the all-cargo airlines. We have Volga Dnieper, who are operating Antonov 124 aircraft in Illusion 76. We have narrow-body Boeing 737s in Etran, but the biggest company that we have is Airbridge Cargo Airlines. They're actually operating 18 Boeing 747. So we are the company with 30 years of experience. We are working in the charter cargo operations, in the scheduled cargo operations. So I think for today's discussion, we can actually bring some value to the overall discussion, and actually to be able to share some company information and the industry information about what's happening in the market. So Achim, for the starters, you mentioned that there's a difference between 2020 and 2021 So what's, in your opinion, the, say, top 3 or maybe top 5 differences?
Okay, the number one difference out of several, which very often is underestimated or even overseen, is the fact that we have Chinese New Year. So Chinese New Year obviously is happening every year, but the difference from this year compared to previous years is the fact that Chinese New Year actually was a few weeks earlier. And that has resulted in the manufacturing sites, in particular in China, obviously, to produce as much as possible as they can, full production output, over capacity production even, and to get these products out into the markets, Europe and North America predominantly, in order to avoid that once the workers will stay away from their production lines for a while, that there's going to be an undersupply. So Chinese New Year was earlier, and that already resulted in additional volumes in the market, which normally we would see towards the end of February. This happened already in January this year. The second factor is obviously COVID. The COVID situation obviously has a massive influence, because the truth is that some 65% of the world cargo capacity is actually being piloted on passenger aircrafts. And I haven't flown for a year. Typically, I fly a few times per week. And the same is obviously applicable to many of our listeners here today. So all the birds, all the flights are grounded, which means the only way to actually move cargo is by using cargo aircrafts and the limited capacity that is available on passenger aircrafts. And the third factor is also COVID related, which are the vaccines, because actually the vaccines are taking away capacity in an already restrained market, but vaccines need to go because everybody wants to save lives. So they get most likely preference over, for example, automotive spare parts. Those, I would say, are three indicators: Chinese New Year, COVID, and vaccines. But Dimitri, that's my point of view. How do you see that?
Well, definitely, I would agree with you on a Chinese New Year. Recently, there was a publication about the China exports and imports, and there's actually saying that in 2 months, China exported 60% more of the goods comparing to the last year. Last year was affected by the beginning of the COVID in China with the closure of the factories. So the China this year is actually showing outstanding results comparing to the last year. So 60% growth in the export and 20% growth in the import. Mm-hmm. Well, as for the vaccines, I would say I understand what you're saying, and I believe the logistics stakeholders have the same, say, maybe idea or the vision for that. But as I see right now, we don't see that much of the spike of demand for the vaccines yet. So we don't think that the vaccines right now is actually pushing the market that far away. To supplement your factors, so to say, I would also mention the growth of e-commerce. Say, from the airline perspective, we see that the e-commerce is growing enormously. It was the big factor in the beginning, but now with the pandemic, well, everybody's staying at home, so don't go to the shopping malls, start to order the things online. And I think usually we think about the e-commerce, about the consumer goods, like small parts, but now we see a lot of the different commodities, including automotive spare parts and sometimes even finished vehicles, actually sold on the marketplaces. And maybe last but not least, since we are here on the automotive EV show, so I would also notice the fact about the chip shortages that we are experiencing. So we see a lot of the demand from the car manufacturing for the chips, and there is, well, definitely not enough of those chips because they are used in the cell phones, in the gaming consoles, which had a huge spike. So it, in any ways, it actually affects the overall supply chain. That's how I see it.
Okay. All right. I agree with you on the chip shortages, and I mean, all of us, we are automotive experts, so we realize that the industry was just recovering after Christmas. Production lines started to ramp up again, and then we had the first wave of chip shortages, and everybody thought it's overcome. It seems not to be overcome, because only in the last 48 hours we can read in the press that in Germany production lines are standing still. The US is impacted. Ford and General Motors announced slowdowns and production stoppages these days for factories in Mexico. I understand also now, besides North America, Mexico, and US, this has now also impacted Brazil. And that is bad. from a freight forwarding perspective, we also see the implications. Typically these ships, obviously you want to fly, but now they need to move at any price. So these ships are predominantly coming out of Asia, as we all know. So now we see also significant requests to put double and triple team drivers on trucks to actually truck ships all the way from Asia into Europe. That is obviously not possible to truck them to North America and to other continents, but we experience this still every day. So yes, I agree, the ship shortage is also one of the reasons why we see the capacity constraint in air freight and why we have struggles in seeing the EV inbound supply chain. I think the biggest implication, though, Dimitri, are the rates, and that's of most interest probably to the majority of our listeners over here. So they understood there's no space, okay, there's no capacity available, but that will result eventually in very, very high rates. I see that in sea freight, where container rates, which used to be, for example, out of China into Long Beach, West Coast USA, they used to be around $2,000 to $3,000. Now they are around $10,000, $12,000, $15,000, even $18,000. So a significant spike in rates. Dimitri, do you see that in air freight as well? Can you confirm that the air freight rates are also going up and going through the roof?
Okay, so let me just go briefly back in time to 2019. 2019 was actually quite a difficult year for freighters. Everybody was struggling to get this additional kilo here and there. But in Q2 2020, the situation actually changed upside down. And we see after the passenger airlines stopped flying, we actually saw how vital, how important freighters are actually. Mm-hmm. And I think it's all driven by the supply and demand. So now we see a lot of the, say, high rates for the air freight. But the question sometimes that we need to ask ourselves is the rates are high right now, or they were just simply too low, say, before that. So that's the question. I mean, as I see right now, as you mentioned, there is a different factors that influencing the capacity. So capacity is not sufficient. So a lot of the long-term players actually want to plan their capacity sometime in advance. So they actually pre-booking this space. That's why that's actually leaving less capacity on the market, which actually driving the prices up. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. This is, I think, the market situation about the supply and demand, and that's how it's developing. From our side, what we're trying to do, we actually want to keep some space for the market to be able to provide the capacity. But of course, as you mentioned, we have our priorities. For example, we do prioritize the space for vaccines transportation because we understand that it's one thing to deliver the e-commerce shipment to the customer, or it's the more important task to deliver the vaccines to those who actually need it. So we try to be flexible in that perspective, but nevertheless, yes, I can confirm that the space is quite limited this year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Also, then again, from my perspective, we want to focus on air freight today. I quickly want to mention sea freight, though, as well, because 85% of our volume in automotive is moved via the oceans. That, of course, we have rates in place with our customers, which typically have a lead time of 12 months, sometimes even 24 months, to give the planning accuracy and guarantee to the car makers and tier one suppliers. And what we see now is we see actually a lot of activity on the spot market, which means we are getting tons of quotation requests for every shipment which is beyond 1 ton or 2 tons, because there are forwarders who cannot uplift the freight. So the customers are going into the market to contact the other freight forwarders seeking for capacity. And that, again, is also inflating the rates further, because the airline industry believes there's so much cargo out there, but in fact, 10 forwarders are tendering the same shipment, but the volume is not 10 times in the market, but only once in the market, and that potentially also inflates the rates. But we are now moving away for a while into short-term contracts for 4 weeks or for 6 weeks, because we, even as the number 1 global ocean freight forwarder and the number 2 global air freight forwarder, we cannot make the commitment over a long period of time, because the market is so volatile. There are so many variances right now that we cannot make long-term commitments. And therefore, we have the agreements with our clients to move into 4 to 6 weeks agreements. And then after 6 weeks, we are renewing the contract and we are adopting then the rates up or we adopting the rates down according to the respective market situation. And that is for us as a freight company, again, resulting in a lot of additional work. So take a European Tier 1 supplier, which typically tenders its global business once a year, and then you work for 4 to 6 weeks on this RFQ, and you go through 3 pricing rounds, but then it's locked, the rate card is established, and you move on with the next customer. Now we see a multitude of these short-term contracts, they all coming back, which actually is also causing the freight industry some headaches, because there's a lot of work to do, and that sometimes also is resulting into certain delays. And I can only emphasize once again, the best way to cooperate with the freight forwarding company right now, in my humble opinion, is to be able to give very good forecasts for air freight capacity, because once we know the 2-week demand, the 3-week demand, we can, as a big forwarder, accommodate your requirements and make everything possible in order to keep your supply chains running. What is not good for us is that when we get, for example, shipments being booked for 5 tons and eventually they are not coming for whatever reason, and then obviously we have to take short-term measures, and this is resulting in just complications and implications and takes time away from what we should actually be focused on most. Dimitri, question to you. How big is the automotive air freight industry? I mean, how big is the market for you?
Okay, so thank you for an interesting question. So as I mentioned about the overall situation in logistics, so if you take the overall, say, moves of the cargo globally, you can see there's only 1% is actually traveled by the air. So if you look at the air freight in terms of the global logistics, you can see that the air freight is the niche already. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the commodities that air freight is transporting, majority of that is actually a machinery. There's high-tech, e-commerce, and a lot of fashion goods. So automotive is actually representing only around 5 to 6% in total. And out of this 5%, I would say 90% is the spare parts, and just only 10% is just the finished vehicles. So, but I think we should not misread those numbers, because a lot of the machinery, a lot of the semiconductors, a lot of the different commodities are actually handled by different commodities and actually needed for the automotive industry. So in my understanding, air freight is the vital part of the supply chain for the automotive. As Arim just mentioned, that you cannot deliver the goods from Asia to North America to Brazil by the truck or by the railroad. So I definitely see with this model that automotive manufacturers have just in time. So automotive is just, I think, the vital part. I mean, with the vast geography of the production of the spare parts in the thousands of different places. So you want to bring those spare parts in one particular manufacturing line without delays, without overstocking. So I think even if you probably do not budget or do not plan to use the air freight in the long run, I think one day you will definitely face the situation that when air freight will be needed, especially in the situation in the world where we live right now with this ocean freight capacity restraints, with the difficulties with the COVID situation. I mean, we see some examples. For example, when the truck drivers will not be allowed to cross the border, so the truck will need to come back to the production base and they use the air freight. So that's how I see it. I mean, in terms of the global numbers, the purely automotive for air freight should not be that big, but I think it's a vital, coordination between the air freight and the automotive. So may I have a question to you? Do you see any difference in the supply chains for the internal combustion engine cars and the battery electric vehicles?
A clear yes to that. Biggest difference which comes to my mind is obviously that traditional supply chains are super optimized and very well oiled. And OEMs and Tier 1 suppliers have years of experience of pretty stable forecast with regards to consumer demand, and they have the bill of material. They know what to ship and what the safety buffer is supposed to be. So those are the times we used to optimize and super optimize and further optimize. And it was really a focus on costs, bringing the supply chain costs down. And also, I agree with you, obviously, Dimitri, to the comment which you made earlier, that probably in the past the freight rates were too little compared to the value which actually logistics are adding to the product. But that again is my personal opinion. But now when it comes to the EV supply chains, for EV startup supply chains, there is no legacy data. We and also our customers, they simply don't know where are they finally going to source. There are new suppliers, there are new products. The bill of material during pre-production is even still changing. So for the EV startup companies and for the EV startup supply chains, the key is not to optimize costs. The key is to make sure the supply chains are running fluidly in order to make sure they're meeting the production cycle. Obviously, that's also the ambition for the traditional cars, but in particular for EV, where we see a big increase in EV car registrations. Consumers want to get a hand on their EV. So that I see the number one difference. We don't have the legacy data, which makes planning very difficult. So rather than having a cost optimized supply chain, you want to have a very flexible supply chain. The other difference is, of course, parts. How many parts are we shipping? We are shipping significantly less parts because take an EV bus. EV bus consists of approximately 900 to 1,000 parts compared to several thousand parts for a traditional bus vehicle. And that has an implication on the aftermarket, because the aftermarket, again, we used to have so many stock keeping units in our warehouses, and the number of SKUs will actually now will be significantly reduced. Also, parts will become smaller, cycle times will be smaller because a lot of technology goes into the electric vehicles, where you see a lot of updates via the air with the connected vehicles. So less and less accidents because of all the sensors. And less we have the case that for the aftermarket for EVs, that we get these emergency requests from a dealer who calls, who says, we have a particular car right now on the shop floor, and we thought that we have to do the 25,000 kilometer inspection, but actually we identified some additional damages or changes that needs to be done. So we have by express to send these spare parts in order to make sure the consumer can collect his car at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And this is express shipments for us, which of course we as a freight company like, because there's a little bit higher margin on that compared to the normal overnight deliveries into the dealerships. And with the EVs, I mean, I see now in the last year and a half, less and less of these express shipments, simply due to the fact that the electric vehicle is a computer on wheels, as you said earlier, Dimitri. And that again means no surprises when the car comes to the garage shop, because the car actually tells the garage guy in advance, these are the parts and components we need. They will be ordered, and then actually they will be delivered to the repair center on time without any further struggles. The biggest difference, however, is of course the lithium-ion battery. To transport the lithium-ion battery, or to transport the cells, to bring them predominantly from Asia into Europe or North America for the battery pack production is a significant issue. You know, they are big, they are bulky, huge in quantities, they are dangerous goods. So wrong handling and mishandling can result in fire, in combust, in explosion. So actually life is at risk when you are shipping this commodity. And that is a significant impact on the supply chain. And today we have so many gigafactories in the world, but 85% are located in Asia. And again, 85% of that are located in China to service the local market. And yes, we see some gigafactories for cell production popping up now also in Europe and in North America, but they're not there yet. They haven't even started production yet. That means for North America and for Europe, where we see now that EV production lines are ramping up quickly, the need to source cells from Asia will continue for the next 5 to 7 years. And even once the first gigafactories in Europe, whether it's Britishvolt or Northvolt or Italvolt, or the respective factories also in North America, even once they are up and running, there's more demand for lithium cells than supply in the local markets. So the inbound supply chain of lithium cells from Asia into Europe and North America should become a key area of concern to all OEMs who are building their battery packs. And that actually is the biggest difference. Since we have to move so much freight right now, Dimitri, I see that forgive me for the expression, but I see cowboy carriers in the market. We spoke before that I'm based in Zurich, so I see the Swiss fleet parked there idle. You know, the dozens of planes cannot fly because passengers are not flying, because we cannot fly due to the pandemic. And actually, it was in the news a couple of weeks ago that in the US, a US carrier lost an engine. He was airborne and the engine fell down. And also there was an aircraft, a cargo aircraft, which departed from Schiphol Airport. And they were just in the air for a few minutes and all the parts were falling off the aircraft, where I wonder, are these cowboy carriers, Dimitri? I mean, is there no safety anymore with the cargo carriers? How do you see that? I have the feeling that everything which can fly now, which used to be a cargo aircraft, is being reactivated in order to provide capacity. How do you see this?
Okay, Ahim, you actually, well, you mentioned the very important question. It's about the flight safety. And for us, no doubt, flight safety is #1 priority. So I actually like to put it as the flight safety should be in the beginning, in the end, and everything in between. So let me just cover this topic from two perspectives. One is the overall maintenance. Actually, for us, we have one of the youngest fleet in the industry. I mean, the biggest share of our group of the companies is the Airbridge Cargo Airlines, which operating Boeing 747s. And the average age of the fleet is 7.2 years of our fleet. For your consideration, our, say, competitors, they actually have the average fleet age exceeding 10 and 13 years. I do not want to mention the competitors whose average fleet age is over 23 years. So as for us, we don't have those restored aircrafts coming from the desert. We actually buying them from Boeing manufacturers. So actually we are buying new aircraft for us. So in terms of the maintenance, we also, you know, participating in the different associations with IATA, with all the prevention. So for us, we actually put the very high importance to the flight safety. As in terms of the lithium batteries, as you mentioned, that's 100% well correct about the lithium batteries being the dangerous goods to be transported, and there is a lot of, say, regulations in the market how to transport those lithium batteries. And you can also say explain, oh, okay, if you open the IATA book, you can see that, say, passenger airlines do not take, for example, standalone lithium batteries. But if you go to the cargo carriers, you can also find those kind of answers. So, oh, we don't carry lithium metal, or we don't carry lithium ion, or we have this limitation, so we have that limitations. We can only carry them in a lower deck, something like that. So for us, I mean, for Airbridge and for the whole group, we actually did some great job. We did the risk mitigation, how to handle those batteries. We have the great expertise. We have an understanding how the overall procedures work. We have actually come up with our ideas how to mitigate the risk. We actually published it in IATA Dangerous Goods regulations. They're actually quite easy and, say, friendly recommendations how to meet the requirements. We actually able to give the ideas how to work, how to pack, what to do, and how to check. We're also working. I mean, you mentioned the batteries as the packs, right? So some of the batteries exceeding 35 kilograms actually are not allowed to be transported by air. So they can only be transported under special provision A99. And for example, for the batteries that are not tested, they will be transported under special provision A88. And this year we have new updates in the regulations about the approval from the different state of the government, from the origin and from the operator. So from our side, we're doing our best to support our customers to keep the traffic going. We're helping our customers to get the approval from Russian Civil Aviation Authority in that perspective. So we actually put that into the, say, top of our mind to be an expert in delivering that type of commodity. I mean, but you're definitely right that majority of the cargo is actually, a majority of the lithium batteries, they actually traveling by ocean, and Airfreight can see the small part of it. But still, it's sufficient. It's something that we should definitely pay a lot of attention and put a lot of efforts to actually being able to move them safely.
Okay. Thank you, Dimitri. We covered 30 minutes. We need to start our wrap up. I suggest we give a little market outlook. And the global air freight market, things are not easy anymore. Our life became very, very complex. So therefore, depending on the location of our listeners and viewers here today, the situation may vary a little. So I try to summarize this here, what is really applicable for each and every market. And I'm in particular keeping in mind China, North America, and Europe. And I think it's a very fair statement to say that also driven by the Boeing 777 groundings, okay, which will take additional probably 2 to 3% capacity out of the market, which will result in the fact that capacity will actually decline and will not increase, which is not a good sign, because that will mean freight rates will most likely remain high, at least for the next 6 to 12 weeks. And even if freight rates, once passenger flights are coming back into the marketplace, the rate level will not drop from where it is today to pre-COVID levels. I think those pre-COVID rate levels we will not see again in a very, very long time. So message number one, due to the continued capacity shortage, rates will remain at a high level. And when they start to ease up, they will ease up slowly. And also another important message is that there's still around the world, and this is applicable for every trade lane, either moderate congestion or high congestion, which means not congestion in the air, but congestion with regards to backlog of cargo. There's more cargo in the market than we can fly from A to B, which will result in delays. So the standard 24 or 48-hour service is at jeopardy right now, because again, there's a significant backlog of freight due to the reasons which we mentioned at the very, very beginning of our session. So therefore, unfortunately, the outlook is rather a little bit pessimistic. It's not very optimistic, but my recommendation to all our customers and hopefully future customers is reach out to your freight forwarding company, to your freight forwarder, and discuss a forecast. The better your forecast accuracy can be on a lane by lane, not just saying how many shipments or kilos or tons are going out of Taiwan or Japan or out of Mexico. But if you can say that we need particular tonnage and space on particular days, on particular routes, the more accuracy we have as a freight forwarding company, the better we can cooperate with our airline partners, such as Volga Dnieper Group, in order to make the best out of the situation today. That is how I would categorize the market outlook from a freight forwarder perspective. Dimitri, back to you. Last question. What is your opinion about the outlook?
Well, I would just go to the very beginning when you mentioned about the differences, causing the vaccine transportation. So here I would actually wanted to highlight two things. One is the actual vaccine tonnage, and the other is the expectations of the vaccines. Mm-hmm. So as we see, vaccines is not there yet. At least they are not flying at that amount that was expected, for example, last year. However, we see that some of the rising demands for example, for COVID tests or maybe needles, some related traffic. And I think there is a lot of expectations that it will be a lot of vaccines flying. Because of these expectations, a lot of stakeholders, take it automotive, healthcare, or aerospace, whatever they actually want to book their space in advance. That's why they are, entering into long-term agreements, actually securing a lot of space and actually taking this space out of the market. So my suggestion, if you have that particular numbers, as Achim just mentioned about the tonnage, the lanes, so try to think about the overall duration of the project, how long it will take, because it will be easier to actually plan the supply chain in advance. Mm-hmm. And in my understanding, if we're talking about the EVs, right? So EVs, in terms of the overall car sales, now representing around 5%, which is not that significant, right? But I definitely see they're surging into our lives, and I definitely see the change in the overall supply chain. Some of the lanes, for example, for spare parts, which are no longer needed, will shrink, but some opportunities will arise, for example, for infrastructure, for the chargers, or for other supportive materials or equipment. So I still believe there is a chance to adjust your supply chain and actually to enter that market with the right partners. How do you think, Achim?
Yes, I absolutely agree. We, as the Kühne Nagel organization, set up our centers of expertise for EV inbound supply chains, for example, at the US West Coast, but also in the Detroit area. And we have those centers located now also in the center of Europe, in Bremen to be precise, and also in Shanghai. And from those locations, we are closely cooperating in particular with the EV startup companies in order to ensure that we can meet their pre-production and then their global vehicle launch. Great. Peter, we are at 35 minutes now, and I'm afraid we have to start to wrap this session up. And I see here from the chat that a couple of questions came in. Peter, would you like to fire
Yes.
a question from the audience at us?
Yeah, so the first question really is designed for you, Dimitri. Given the fact that there are not many passenger flights available, does this have any impact on the repositioning of your pilots?
Okay, I got the question. So thank you for that. Well, to be honest, the COVID situation actually shaped our network in many ways. I mean, since passenger airlines not flying, so it's difficult to position our crews in some of the countries. So if you want to bring our crews to some countries, there will be some restrictions on a local level to do the quarantine. That's why we need to think in advance how to adjust our network. Maybe we're not flying to that particular destinations, but we are flying to the different destinations. And actually, it also concerns the crew changes capabilities. We're not been able to allocate our crews in some of the countries because of the restrictions. That's why we need to, for example, to have additional costs to operate double crews on the same airplane without the crew change. And we need to optimize our network accordingly. So some of the destinations, actually, we are not flying, not because we don't want to fly there, but because it's operationally difficult. We have the cruise limits, cruise capabilities are stretched to its limits already. So we try to look at the best routings that we have. So in my understanding, definitely it affects a lot of the airline air cargo business.
Thank you. You mentioned a double, just staying on there for a second, 2 crews. Do you mean you literally fly out 2 crews for each journey?
For example, they have their working hours, right? So they at least, for example, for short flights, it can be just 2 pilots, the first pilot and the second pilot. For long haul flights, for example, they will probably need 4 or 5 people. But if we don't intend to, say, do the crew change, sometimes we have 8 pilots flying on the same airplane just not to do the crew layover. That's actually, as I said, stretching the capabilities, the limitations of the crews that we have. It actually affects the overall flight time. So our cruise is working quite hard this year in the freighter business.
We touched earlier on sort of pilots being retrained across flights because they've been sort of effectively grounded, if you want to call it that, for a number of times. When you do the double run with 2 captains on board for it, could that achieve the overseeing of the other person, or is it sort of not going to be allowed because they're both actually technically working at the same time?
No, I don't know the exact details, but actually they are not doing the same job. For example, one say pilot is in charge of the airplane aviation, right? So the other is just sleeping and resting. So his working time is not going. So his working time will start when he starts to sit in the pilot's chair. That's actually how it's done. Okay.
If I could stay a little bit more on that. When you're looking sort of at pilots in general, are they trained for a specific airline or a number of airlines, which you mentioned before the grounding of the 777s? How has that been achieved during lockdown in terms of people being furloughed? How do we get that back? Is it more simulation testing for pilots moving across it, or how?
Well, as far as I'm aware, the pilots are trained for a particular aircraft type. So, for example, if the pilots need to fly on the narrow body aircraft for certain hours, get this certification, the license, then he'll be able to be trained to say wide body aircraft. And I think there's two issues that actually come into my mind. Is that you mentioned that a lot of the passenger airlines not flying, so the the pilots doesn't have their daily practice, so they will need to do the training once again. And one other concern that I have is a lot of aircraft is actually staying on the ground for a year or so. So when they start flying again, we might see the difference in the maintenance and the engineering overall. So I think we as an industry, we need to actually pay a lot of attention to that question about the pilots training and the overall maintenance of the aircraft that was not flying during the COVID times.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Peter, I see a question coming in from our friend John over here. Let me read that out. It says, hello Achim, hello Dimitri. As a result from the current backlogs, do you see already larger order quantities to cope with production demand or increase safety stocks, which will then lead to even more capacity need and potential backlog? So is there a potential bullwhip effect, you know? Dimitri, shall I read the question again? I don't know whether you can see it as well on the screen.
Yes, I can read it.
Yeah, okay. So maybe since you spoke, I can, and you can still think about it. So the answer is yes, John. The simple answer is yes. And I also believe that this will result in a bullwhip effect, but knowing about it can obviously ease up the situation. And what I mentioned previously, and I hate repeating myself, but having the forecast accuracy and really telling the freight industry, what is the demand for the next couple of weeks, that will help significantly, A, to provide the space, but B, and I also referred to this before, if the same requests are going out to multiple freight forwarders and potentially also to the airline directly as well, this will just, again, inflate and create a hyper market, which is really, really unnecessary, and we don't want to see that. So therefore, being very transparent along the value chain, along the supply chain, will help to avoid the situation, John, which you described, which will result in further delay and further shortages. I hope, John, this answered your question. But Dimitri, what is your opinion about this?
Oh, I definitely agree. Well, I mean, it's difficult to just answer that in general, because we have different industries. Some of them actually are rising, some of them actually are shrinking. Some of the companies do the overstocking, some of the companies actually taking the risk and betting on the charter operations. So I think the general trend is correct, as you mentioned, but it also depends on the market, on the industry, and the customer, well, say, risk mitigation policy.
Mm-hmm.
Could I come in on one really for you, Achim? You announced yesterday as a company the purchase of alternative airline fuels.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate on this a little bit more?
Yes. Kühne+Nagel started already 2.5 years ago with our net zero carbon program, which is our company's ambition to win the race against climate change and to decarbonize international supply chains. So we as a Kühne+Nagel organization, all our operations are already fully climate neutral. And we are trying to be one of the trailblazers in the industry in order to further decarbonize supply chains for our clients. And we could see a lot, we could read and see a lot in the last 12 months that companies started to offset their supply chains. That means our customers, together with our intelligence, we identified where do we see the lanes, the trade lanes with heavy emissions, so that we first of all know the baseline. And once we have the baseline of the emissions, you then start to identify where can we reduce the emissions by changing carriers from fast steaming to slow steaming, for example, or to actually switch trucks which are operating in India or cross-border Mexico, USA, or in Europe from heavy fuel trucks to electric vehicles, in particular when we go into the city centers. So in the past, the trend was to offset the emissions. And we are also doing this by investing into respective projects around the world, which will then again support the race against climate change. What we have announced yesterday, actually, I believe it marks a milestone, not just in the history of our company, but it marks a milestone in our industry, because we don't want to greenwash the supply chains. Yes, it's great that we are offsetting the emissions which we are creating today, but that is not going to help us today. That's going to help us in a couple of years. So we really want to decarbonize the supply chain, which means we are using also on airlines now, we are using biofuel, or we're using alternative airline fuel, which will create zero emissions. And we are operating already together with KLM, the trade lane from Los Angeles into Amsterdam, zero emission flight. So you fly with us, there are no emissions on this flight, no offsetting required. And now with this yesterday announced partnership with American Airlines, we will be able to fly, I think, 3-4 times around the world, okay, without even producing any emissions. And that is, of course, only a small drop of water on a hot stone. But if we start with the first airline partner and we increase this engagement, and then also the other freight forwarders and airlines will do something very, very similar, we will be able to make a big difference against climate change today. And I'm very proud about this additional milestone of Kühne+Nagel, which is just underlying our overall ambition that by 2030, in 9 years from now, all the Kühne+Nagel global supply chains shall be climate neutral. It's a big ambition, and what was announced yesterday is another step into the right direction.
Thank you. Dimitri, globally, how many cargo aircraft are there?
Okay.
That's sort of sorry.
No, let me say put it this way. So as far as I remember, so it's in total in the world globally, that's 34,000 aircraft, passengers and cargo, and around 10% of them are cargo aircraft. But you can also say you cannot just say how many aircraft, because the aircrafts are different. They have a different capacity. They have a different say a load in them. So, for example, we have narrow body 737s, which the capacity of 20 tons, or you have 747-8 with the capacity 120 tons, for example. So I don't think that the number of the aircraft is quite a relative, say, item how we can measure the overall market.
Okay, looking at sort of the question to Achim regarding alternative fuels, from your perspective as sort of a major sort of cargo carrier within this sector, what are you looking to do to address that? I was meaning more, sorry, Achim, I was meaning more for Dimitri from a Wagner perspective. Sort of what plans have you got?
Okay. So the first question about the number of aircraft, but I think what I can elaborate is that in terms of the tonnage that globally transported by air is around 20 million tons, something like that. And for our group, we are actually responsible for around 800,000. So basically our share is around 4% globally. But if you go to the markets where we mainly operate, is for example from China to Europe, our share is around 18%. And in terms of the operations, we actually investing. I said it earlier about the youngest fleet in the industry, and we're actually investing in the most efficient airplanes that there is. So it's a -8. It's basically one of the most fuel efficient aircrafts ever created. So the majority of our fleet is actually focusing on that. From marketing perspective, we're also focusing on this renewables trend, and we're looking forward how we can actually extend it further, because as Achim just said, so in 9 years they want their suppliers to be neutral in terms of the CO2. So we definitely have our say endeavors, and we have our plans how to actually meet and to go to that direction. So we have a multiple ideas, which unfortunately I cannot elaborate right now during this session, but definitely this is the question that we are working very closely.
This is probably an absolutely crazy question, but given the reduction of people traveling, is there any possibility of mixed flights, i.e. a greater proportion of cargo to people balancing the weight? Is that doable when we've got a situation where there's not enough sort of planes to actually move what we need?
Okay, so let me just take this question. So for us, I mean, as the group of the companies, we actually made a decision to work with the cargo. So we don't consider working with the passengers. But I think last year, in terms of the industry, we see a lot of the so-called freighters, is the passenger airlines converting their aircraft to transport the cargo. So they're basically putting the cargo in the passenger seats and in the belly compartment. So I think mixed models, as you mentioned, is difficult to achieve because of the different regulations. How do you want to actually fix the cargo inside the airplane and to let people sit near? I think this will be difficult from the technical perspective, and it will be difficult from, say, certified legal perspective, how to combine them on the same deck. So honestly, I don't see that will be the case in the near future. I see, though, that freighters will still be operated. So some of the cargo will be transported on the passenger airplanes, but without the passengers.
Correct.
Or I see the passengers will be just flying and the cargo will remain in the belly compartment.
I can confirm this, Peter, that in the absence of freighter capacity, as elaborated now over the last 45 minutes, we are also deploying idle passenger flights, and we fill up the belly with 30, 35, 40 tons of cargo in order to fly them, for example, out of Germany into North America, or from Brazil into North America. So this is not unheard of, and this is not just being practiced by Kühne and Nagel, but also by other freight companies. And this way we can better utilize the idle fleet, because Dimitri mentioned before, if an aircraft hasn't been moved in a year, you cannot just get it out of the garage and fly it again. Several checks are required. So actually it's a win-win situation where the airline is happy that the plane is being moved, and but we don't interfere with the passenger cabin. And also I would like to mention that this conversion passenger into cargo flight, yes, that happened at the very early stages of the pandemic, and this is also still going on, but it's more happening in the background. And I believe it is also, it will not move the needle with regards to providing really noteworthy additional capacity, but yet again, it supports, because right now, every additional capacity available in the market should be deployed.
Okay. Well, thank you both. We've actually have run on, which is good. Anyone who didn't ask any questions or want to ask a question when they're watching on demand afterwards, both Dimitri and Achim are on the platform, as I'll call it, in the member connected, so you'll be able to talk to them sort of directly. That was a really interesting session, and sort of, we spoke earlier about it could go on and on and on. Well, actually it could, but you guys are a bit busy as well. But thank you all, and that was really, really interesting. And let's keep safe. Let's keep looking at new ways of adapting, or not just adapting, but totally changing as we move forward. So thank you both, and thank you everyone.
Thank you for watching.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Hi, it's Peter again, and thank you for watching the session. Don't forget, you can connect with the community, send messages to each other, and start to build relationships for the future. Also, take a look at our supplier showrooms. Our partners have got lots of products and services that they have to offer, which again could be of benefit to you. Make the most of the opportunity, and thank you again for joining us.